Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Before we get started, I need to read the following statements. May I remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live via the internet and recorded for archiving future viewing. Can I have any apologies for absence, please?
Yes, Chair, we've got apologies from Councillor Margaret Wilkinson and Councillor Pam Drake.
I also have apologies from Councillor Matthew Lloyd as well. We move on to... I've also heard that Councillor Nick Hodges will be joining us later. His duties as a Barry Town Mayor are just coming to an end as we speak and will be on his way shortly. If that was what you were going to say, Councillor. Thank you. Moving on to item 2, minutes of the last meeting. Move the minutes. Seconded, thank you. And item 3, please. Declaration of any interest. Councillor Driscoll.
I have a personal and prejudicial interest on the St Cyrus development. I will be speaking and then leaving the room. Okay.
Thank you. Any other members wish to declare an interest? Thank you very much. Oh, hands over there.
Just for clarification, could Councillor Driscoll confirm what his interest is in the matter at St Cyrus?
Yes, Councillor Johnson. As you're aware, I live right next to the development.
Yeah, Councillor Driscoll will be speaking in the capacity of a Vale of Glamorgan councillor, speaking at the committee, not taking part in the discussion, and then we'll leave the chamber. Any other members wish to declare an interest? Thank you. Moving on to item 4 on the agenda, delegated building regulations applications. Have someone to move those? Move, thank you. And item 5 are delegated planning applications. Move, thank you. Item 6 is appeals. Vicky. There's nothing to add on appeals. No decisions this time. Move the appeals, thank you. Item 7, item 7.1, delegated trees list. Moved, thank you. Now we move to the second item under trees, which is Tree Preservation Order number 2, 2017. Hand over to Vicky, please.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have any matters arising to report on this one. Members will be aware that we had a site visit at this site this morning, so thank you to those that attended. This is slightly unusual. We don't have many of these each year, but we dealt with an application for the removal of these trees as trees within a conservation area, and we felt that they were trees with some significant amenity value within the conservation area and they should be retained. So the process for dealing with that is to refuse the application for the TCA and to put a TPO on the trees. Having done so, we've served the TPO notice, and if there are any objections to that notice, then it needs to come to planning committee for that to be confirmed. In this case, the owners of the trees in the house next door have objected to the applications. Sorry, not the house next door, I should say, the house at Abuthin, which is in St Hilary. They've objected on various grounds which are set out in the report. Concerns that the trees may cause some structural damage to the wall at the front of the property, which is a feature recognised in the conservation area appraisal. As we saw on site today, there's no obvious evidence of any damage to the walls happening at present. Similarly, concerns about the telegraph pole immediately next to the trees. Again, no obvious evidence of there being any damage or any reports of that being the case, and in any event that is up to British Telecom to look after their equipment and to undertake any pruning to the trees as necessary, which would now require consent. Other concerns that are set out in the report relate to the size of the trees, but that in itself is not a problem. We don't have any evidence that there's any sort of structural imbalance of the trees or any problems by virtue of their size. They just need to be looked after with sort of regular arboricultural care. So we're recommending that members do confirm the order, and then any future works to the trees, or in fact an application to remove the trees, would require a TPO application in the future.
Thank you. Councillor Parker.
Yeah, I'm being the local ward member, I did attend the site visit this morning, and I can confirm that I support the officer's recommendation. Directly opposite are a whole bank of trees on Tumblers Chase, planted, I guess, at the similar time. The trees are, in my view, very good condition, and I would recommend that we support confirmed tree preservation order number 2017 at St Hilary.
Are you moving officer
I'm
recommendations?
moving officer
Moves recommendations. Seconded, Councillor Penrose. Anyone else wish to comment? All in favour of officer recommendations? Any against? No, I think that's unanimous. Thank you. Moving on to item 8 on the agenda, enforcement action. Vicky.
Thank you, Chair. This relates to land and buildings at Miserfro, Colwinston Lane in Llyswyrney. As members will see from the report, we received a complaint at the end of last year, which related to a new timber building being constructed on the site. That's the building in question that the complaint related to. In undertaking that site visit, we noted that not only had this building been erected without planning permission, but also that a previous building, now shown in the photo on the screen, which did have the benefit of a planning application. However, the building's been built not in accordance with the approved details. It's slightly larger, and those doors are different to what was approved, and I think the overhang as well. In addition, the use of the building, well, it had been approved for agricultural use, whereas it would appear that it's not being used for agricultural use, as there were vehicles, including a flatbed truck, a motorbike and 2 cars being stored in the building at the time. In addition, the planning application had there had been some details of some road planings on the site, and that planning application had required their removal. They haven't been removed, and in addition, some patio slabs have been laid as a hard standing, which you can just see in the foreground of this photograph. Again, you know, unauthorised development, which does detract from the visual amenity of the site and the countryside. Obviously, all of these matters, given its countryside location, the importance to protect the character and openness of the countryside, and the harm that can be done from sporadic buildings like this in the countryside with no agricultural justification. Hence, we're seeking enforcement authorisation for their removal and to cease the use of the land for its current, what appears to be the use on the site being a mix of agriculture and vehicle storage.
Thank you, Vicky. Any member wish to make any comments? Move officer recommendations. Councillor Bird, a seconder for that. Councillor Penrose. All in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. Moving on to item 9. Vicky will talk us through review of the implementation of LDP policy MG4 and affordable housing supplementary planning guidance.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a report that has come to Planning Committee. It went to Planning to Cabinet on Monday, where it was endorsed. The report has now come to Planning Committee for your comments, if you have any. Any comments or amendments proposed by Planning Committee would then be reported back to Cabinet if you have any comments to make. The purpose of this report was to review the impact of the implementation of policy MG4 of the local development plan and the associated affordable housing supplementary planning guidance that goes with that. The report focuses on primarily the issue of the requirement for affordable housing contributions to be made on small site developments where for a large area of the Vale of Glamorgan where there is a net gain of 1 dwelling or more, we require 40% affordable housing, which is in practice implemented through payment of a contribution. That policy has been implemented since for 2 years, since January 2016, albeit it's only really had teeth and real weight since the adoption of the LDP in June 2017. So the report sets out what's happened to date over that time period and what the implications of the policy are. In essence, if I draw your attention to paragraphs 12 and 13, it basically summarises that during that time, 7 applications for small sites have come forward and have satisfied the policy in totality, which equates to a financial contribution of £444,000 and £71.40, which will be used as a contribution towards delivering affordable housing on other sites. During the same period, 11 applications have not made those contributions, having demonstrated to us that development viability would be impeded if they were required to make those contributions. And also a number of applications have been refused, and the report details what planning inspectors have had to say. In large part, before the adoption of the local development plan, we didn't get that much support from the planning inspectorate in terms of implementing that policy. However, having now got an adopted development plan, they are supporting that policy stance, which is quite encouraging at this stage. So, in a nutshell, we feel that that in a large part the policy is working and having effect, but we have suggested some changes to the SPG. Three main ones: the way in which we contribute affordable housing calculations. So, at the way the affordable housing SPG is written at the moment, if you're building, say, a 5-bed large detached house, which quite often these one-off builds are, you pay a contribution that's the equivalent of that. In undertaking this review, what became apparent was actually that's disproportionate on small site developers, because on larger sites, like the St Cyrus site that we're looking at tonight, we look at housing need in that area, and the developer builds what the housing need is in that area, which will quite often be smaller units, like 2 and 3 bed units. So by asking for a contribution for a 4 or 5 bed house, that's not in reality what we're going to build with that contribution. So it's recommended that we now look at things slightly differently, and we look at what the need in the area is on each application in consultation with our housing services section, and calculate the value of the contribution on that basis. In addition, we've suggested adding a bit more support and advice and guidance for developers who want to demonstrate development viability as an issue. So we've put in a new template into the SPG and an example of how to complete that, so that people know where to come and where to get advice if they have got issues with development viability. And lastly, we've suggested introducing an exemption from the affordable housing policy for self-build units. We actually at present have relatively few self-build units a year. We estimate between 0 and 5 dwellings a year come forward as self-build units. The idea behind this, it copies what's happened in England with the implementation of the Community Infrastructure Levy, where there is a self-build exemption, and it's basically in recognition of encouraging that area of the market as something that actually is a good thing for the Vale of Glamorgan if we can encourage more self-builders. So those are the 3 main changes set out in an amended version of the supplementary planning guidance, which is attached as an appendix to the report. And if planning committee don't have any comments to make, then that would now be taken forward as the future affordable housing SPG. If you do have comments to make, it'll be reported back to Cabinet for them to make a final decision on it. There are obviously also separate scrutiny call-in procedures if you wish to call it into a scrutiny committee as well. Okay.
I have Councillor Driscoll first, then I'll come to you, Councillor Thomas.
Thanks for that, Vicky. Just one question. When will you know when someone's applying for a new build, when will they know what contribution they have to pay? Because that can change, kind of, if the need is for 2-bedroom affordable houses as opposed to 4-bedroom affordable houses. So when will someone know? And could that change regularly?
No, so that would be determined at the time of the application. So the SPG sets out we'd encourage pre-application advice. Housing need is assessed through our local housing and market assessment, which is undertaken every 5 years and reviewed. And then in addition to that, we have housing waiting lists and so on. So our housing colleagues would have a look at whatever information is up to date and available and decide what the need is in that area, what we would likely build. And then that would be secured at the time that the planning application. So they'd be signing up to a Section 106 agreement at that time with the value of the contribution agreed and specified at that time.
Yes, so that could be 57,000, or it could be as low as 27,000.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, just wanted to sort of query the definition of self-build. I mean, is self-build. If I buy a plot in my neighbour's garden and put a house up for myself to live in, is that self-build? If, for example, my house accidentally gets knocked down, as is apparently possible, and I want to put up a much bigger property, does that become self-build? I'm just looking for an explanation of what you mean by that.
So it's all a bit of a new process to us. We've never had a self-build exemption. We've never done anything to do it, and we haven't even recorded precisely, you know, self-builds aren't a sort of thing that we monitor per se. The way we've suggested introducing it copies what they've done for the community infrastructure levy process. And what it basically does is, if you buy a plot, whether it's in your garden or if it's somebody else's, whatever it is, if you're either building it yourself or procuring that a contractor builds it for you, and then you're the first person to occupy it and you live in it for the first 3 years, that's what the definition encompasses. So there's legal mechanisms in place where you have to keep notifying us every year and demonstrating with some evidence like council tax bills and utility bills and so on that you're still living there. That's where you get your self-build exemption. If at any point during that time you breach it by moving out or get tenants in or anything else like that, you're then back to square one, if you like, and you're liable for the contribution. So if there's an issue of development viability, this wouldn't be the route that you'd go down, because you would still, through the development viability route, you don't even need to enter into a legal agreement in the first place. You just demonstrate the viability is an issue and you get your planning permission. This is only for those cases where actually it would otherwise be viable to pay the contribution, but because you're a self-builder, we're saying that you don't need to pay it.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you for that Vicky. Just a couple of quick queries. Firstly, the figure of £444,000, is that what we've got in the bank, or is that what's been agreed with, with people already? It's the page 47 figure.
It's not the figure that we've got in the bank, it's the figure that's been agreed with people. We have had some money in. I'm just trying to find the relevant appendix for that. There was one that was paid with immediate effect. Bear with me. Yep, so at Appendix A, which is on page 52, that sets out where those 7 applications, where they relate to. So it's the Cloyne-Noydog farm, the second one down, where we've already received the 87,000. So that's sitting in the bank. All the rest of them are ones that have either been agreed and a pending signature of the 106, or the 106 has been signed, and when it's implemented, it'll be paid.
So, I mean, on that basis of the sort of the payment in arrears, how does this fit into our actual house building and into the programme of where this money goes?
So the money comes in just like this isn't the only source of affordable housing contributions. We also have them on larger sites where the developer has paid us because they've only delivered, say, 35% on site, those sort of things. So we've got a few pots coming in, and we've had some that have been on the books for some time. It's with our housing team to deliver that and to feed it in through either through the council house build programme or through enabling developments that registered social landlords would undertake on our behalf. So, for example, there's an RSL scheme in St Mary Church that was delivered using 106 contributions.
Sorry, one more, Chair. Sorry, just considering, I'm just looking at the so where the locations of these. I know it's obviously none of these are in, for example, the Barry area. I'm just wondering, sort of, so how the how that, what the process is going to be for putting that money back into the pot, how those decisions are going to be made, and also just is there anything else that can be done in terms of promoting self-build where it's appropriate? Because if it's such a small level, I mean, it's clear that I think you can see you've already pointed out the scalar differences between larger developments and small scale developments and self-build, and I'm thinking I think my parents probably did a self-build, sort of 35, 40 years ago, whatever it was, and it is quite a difficult thing to do and achieve. So I'm just wondering if there's anything else that can be done to promote smaller scale developments rather than some of the mass volume that we see around the place.
I'll just briefly answer the first point. So there's a reason why none of these are in Barry, and that's because the policy doesn't apply in Barry, Roos, Llantwit, St Athan. Those market areas don't support, in terms of viability, the application of this policy. That's not to say the contributions couldn't be used potentially in those areas, because the contributions are used to meet housing need and wherever that's acutest. So you'll be familiar with the protocol for spending 106 monies. That's done in consultation with the cabinet members and the local ward members. So that process, you know, is clearly set out, and that's what's followed in terms of spending that money. It's a bit of a side issue, the issue of encouraging small site developments, but it's something that the Welsh Government are looking at, and I understand from their officials that we're expecting a new version of Planning Policy Wales to come out imminently. I understand next week possibly, and they are looking at addressing that issue. I don't know precisely how they're going to do that, but I think through encouraging potentially the allocation of small sites, that sort of thing. It's also something that I sit on the Cardiff Capital Region housing theme subgroup, and it's something that subgroup is looking at very closely, and looking at interventions to help self-builders, things like plot shops, things like financing and arranging capital and things like that, to try and reignite that area of the market, really.
Any other members wishing to ask questions, or more importantly comment on anything which you feel needs changing in the document? One more question from Councillor Driscoll.
Vicky, just wondering, on sections 12 and 13 paragraphs, 7 planning applications and 11 that didn't have to pay. Have you any figures for how many people didn't go past the pre-application stage?
Sorry. No, we don't. I guess a lot of that is anecdotal. We've looked at overall numbers of planning applications for these types of sites, and there's no evidence to say that there's been a drop-off in the type of applications coming forward in the first place. Ultimately, I think because there's this quite clear ability to be able to demonstrate viability, so if, you know, the only reason why someone wouldn't come forward, I guess, is because it makes their scheme unviable, and because that can be demonstrated through this process, it's a sort of circular argument. So we don't anticipate there being any real impact in terms of the overall number of those types of developments coming forward.
If there's no other questions, in view of the recommendations at the front of the report, I will move the noting with no comments on the report. Seconded. All in favour? Thank you very much for that. Moving on to planning applications, part of the agenda. Welcome to Councillor Hodges and Councillor Drake. I will make sure your apologies are removed from the minutes. Thank you. Okay, so our first planning application this evening is 2017/01136/HYB, former St Cyries Lower School in Merch Road, Dinas Powys. And I'll ask Steve to give us an overview of this one first. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Just firstly, we have matters rising on this application. We've had 8 letters of representation from neighbours. Having summary of the letters is that they continue to raise the same issues that were raised and that are covered in the report. So in terms of the application, the plan before you shows the application site. So this is quite unique. It's a hybrid application which comprises of 2 elements. The first is a full planning permission for 215 dwellings and associated works. That includes access, drainage and landscaping, and that's in the yellow zone on the plan. And the purple area in the middle at the bottom, that relates to outline planning permission, and that is for community and recreational use. So the site itself extends to about 12 hectares of land, which comprises the St Cyries Lower School, which has been demolished. Part of that is associated playing fields. In addition to that, greenfield land, including agricultural land and woodland. As we saw from the site visit this morning, there are existing houses along the northern boundary of the site, Cherry Close, Windy Ridge and Little Orchard. And to the west, the site borders Sunnycroft Lane, a private drive. Existing vehicle access from Merch Road, or the top of Merch Crescent. That will remain and be upgraded as part of the application proposals. So as I said, if we go on to the next shot, if we've got the, we have. So in a quick summary, the report shows the detailed improvements to the top of the road. So a new roundabout is going to be going in, which is outside the medical centre, in place of the current grass triangle. A cycleway footway will be provided on the western part of Merch Road. That will then provide links and crossover at the medical centre junction, and then that will run south and then cross over the road then to link in with the community site. So the site itself is an allocated site in the LDP. It was allocated for 300 dwellings. As part of the pre-application process, etc., and the developers' initial discussions with NRW, it was found that the site contains dormouse, which are a protected species. As part of that, and the very strict regulations, the developable area of the site has had to be reduced on the basis that what is taken out in terms of dormouse habitat has had to go back in terms of replanting. So we're now down to 215 dwellings from the original anticipated 300 dwellings. So the net developable area has come down quite a bit. The application was reported to the Design Commission for Wales. There was some quite informed discussions in relation to providing a sense of place, also discussions about orientations of dwellings. Again, that and part of the pre-application process and working with the developers during the application process, the scheme has been amended quite considerably, where a lot of the development now focuses and fronts onto the community centre or the community space rather than backing onto it. So if you look at the plan in front of you, the hatched areas around the periphery of the site comprises mainly of wooded areas and sections of hedgerow, but the main thing is that the hatched areas are mitigated, replanted areas. That is again for more tree planting to provide the habitat. So say as part of the application, very briefly, just in terms of connections, we felt it was important that the site connects and integrates well with Dinas Powys. So working with NRW, we managed to persuade Natural Resources Wales to have a footpath connection through the mitigation area to Sunnycroft Lane. From our point of view, that provides a key critical link into Dinas Powys and the community facilities within the Merch area. And equally, when the community recreation space is developed, that also provides access from the residents of Dinas Powys onto this part of the site. Again, in terms of house types, we've worked with the developers. We've had quite a few amendments to the house types, and particularly the corner turning units. There's a variety of mix of largely detached plots, different formats, different scales, mainly two-storey. There's a typical street scene in front of you. Again, the house types, generally a mix of render and stone with some sort of stone detailing around sills and coins, etc. So from your office's point of view, we're happy with the form of the development and the general layout. Just moving briefly on to some of the discussions that took place this morning in relation to construction traffic issues and general wider traffic issues. Just to summarise pages 120 and 121 of the report. So as part of the application and as a requirement of the application was supported with a transport assessment. That has been independently assessed by Mott MacDonald, and Steve Arthur works at Mott MacDonald. We can bring Steve in if necessary when the discussion takes place. So in summary, the TA reviewed the site, the traffic generation from the residential element and also traffic generation from the community use. It did conclude that the Merch/Cardiff Road junction and the Cardiff Station Road junction are at capacity, but what they've said is that future scenarios for both junctions are they would be over capacity due to background growth alone. So excluding the site, they would be at capacity, and therefore by bringing in the development impact on top of that, the additional impacts, as the report says, are not considered to cause capacity issues so great that would cause any problems much greater than the existing. Say Steve can certainly expand on that. Just as a couple of points, the construction traffic management issue, the construction traffic concerns were raised this morning. There is a specific condition which relates to construction traffic management, which is condition 24. We'd like to suggest an amendment to that in relation to the timings of construction vehicles. So that the suggestion is that we insert some text having regard to peak traffic after details and timings and school drop-off times. So it's important for us that so obviously the construction is minimised out of the peak times, the general peak times, and also the school peak times. In just as aside from the more of the highway engineering side as well, there is a requirement for certainly TROs potentially during the construction traffic management side, the temporary TROs, and also condition 17 relates to full highway engineering details. There should also be a reference to the necessary TROs within condition 17. So generally, more in terms of highway layout, the highway engineers looked at this. We've had lots and lots of amendments in relation to the hierarchy of the roads. We feel that the hierarchy and the balance of Muse courts and private drives is appropriate. You know, we're having more informal highways where we can. Again, everything has been designed to have a sort of gradual transition against the highways, and particularly the buffers around. Visitor parking is proposed. The site is delivering the parking requirements in line with the parking standards for housing. Visitor spacing is slightly below the required standard, but as the report does set out, the site is in a particularly sustainable location, and under the highway section does detail the distances to various community facilities in some detail in the report. Just some other issues. The scheme is delivering, as Vicky said before, it's delivering 40% affordable housing. The 10-year split is in line with our requirements. The affordable, go back up, the affordable housing mix is shown with the yellow dotted and the blue dotted properties, which you may not be able to see. But there's a good dispersal throughout the sites. Rather than pepper potting, 40% is now pretty much part of the development. So it spans across the development. So again, as the report says, we're delivering a full Section 106 package on this scheme in line with the policy. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you for those members who came along to the site visits today. I thought it was an hour and a half, very well spent. I feel I got a good sense, and I know other members did, of the scale of the site and the issues relating to any roads around the site as well. We'll move forward into the speaking section of the application. We've got 3 speakers from members of the public against the application. We have 4 members of the council other than on the planning committee wishing to speak, and there is the applicant's representative to speak. I will be enforcing the time limit. I will remind people that clarification and questions can be asked by the committee, so don't take time taking too much time explaining something. If it can be dealt with in an acronym, we can certainly come back and ask for any clarifications we feel we need, and with due respect to the written representations. So first person I have on the list is Mr. Richard Grigg. If you want to take your space up there. When you're ready to speak, if you just turn your microphone on, you'll have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Yes, I'm not here to object to more houses being built in Dinas Powys in the future. There needs to be more housing, including affordable and social housing, so the young people can remain in the village. What I am objecting to is new houses being built without improvements to the current infrastructure. The officer conclusion that this is a sustainable development is, in my opinion, plainly wrong. Anyone travelling along Cardiff Road can see the volume of traffic in the village is a huge problem. There's several junctions, as was mentioned, that are already over capacity: Castle Drive, Merch Road, Cardiff Road, and the Mary Harrier junction. The LDP makes reference to these junctions and indicates they're inadequate at present. There is clearly an identified need to improve the capacity of these junctions. However, the Vale have never explained how this is possible, and it seems that they're saying it's even going to get worse even if houses weren't built. To build an additional 215 houses is going to make a bad situation worse. This is on top of an additional 70 houses off Carleon Road that have already received planning permission. That's almost 300 additional houses. If each property had 2 cars, that would be extra 600 cars on the road. Travelling back and forth 2 times a day, that would be 1,200 car trips every day. If this application is granted, it would lead to gridlock in the village. These cars are all going to have to go through the already overcapacity junctions. This application should not be granted with the current infrastructure. There is currently an investigation being undertaken on how to improve the traffic flow. Part of that investigation is looking at the possibility of building a bypass together with multimodal solutions. The reason for this investigation is because there's already a problem with traffic in Dinas Powys. You can only make a decision on what's in front of you. At present, the infrastructure is not in place, and therefore planning should be refused. Diolch.
Thank you very much, sir. Any members, before Rod steps up, any members of the Planning Committee have any clarification questions? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that, Richard. Sorry, just to clarify, I mean, so you were introduced as Mr. Richard Rigg. I'm aware that you're a community councillor for the Merch Ward. Is this are you also here representing the community council or any representatives, or are you speaking on a personal perspective?
I'm speaking on a personal perspective today.
I read out what was on my piece of paper. My apologies. Any other questions, clarification? Okay, thank you. I've asked Mr. Rod Harrod to please take his seat. When you're ready, sir, if you just put your microphone on, you'll have 2 minutes.
Local development plan. Planning, politics, policies, pounds. All these P's, but where's the one for people? The people councillors represent and officers are supposed to support. You could say the proposal is pinned to the LDP. Why therefore is the LDP being cherry-picked to make a case with those rules saying it should be rejected, avoided? Policies SP7, MD2 and MD5 require developments that have a direct impact on the highway network to deliver appropriate improvements to it, not to cause unacceptable impact on road safety or to exacerbate existing traffic congestion. But we're told nothing can be done at the Merch traffic lights and congestion will increase. Then the officer's report ignores MG16 that says to mitigate the impact of the development on the highway network, improvement schemes will be required. Why is it omitted? What about MD5? It talks about no unacceptable impact on the amenity and character of the area from noise, traffic, congestion and parking. What about the extra vehicle trips daily on Merch Road? Not 69 out and 43 in that Barrett's project at peak time. Simple maths says 2 cars from 215 houses, 860 trips. Plus huge construction vehicles trundling past infant and junior schools daily up and down the 1 in 9 gradient, Merch Crescent, for 4 years. Please pass this application with conditions. Conditions to include no development until an alternative access is in place. The bypass features in 2 of the 4 shortlisted traffic options due to be announced within weeks. That is a win-win solution. Time's up. I end as I began. Please think about people.
Thank you, Mr. Harrod. Any members want to ask any questions of clarification? Councillor Johnson. Turn your microphone off, please. Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Just for clarification, your request is that we add a condition that that we should pass this only once the bypass has been built. Is that, I'm just checking if that's what you're asking us to do, and also a clarification from the officers whether that's a reasonable or possible condition to implement.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Vicky.
I'm sure there will come in the debate more discussion about the Dinas Powys bypass. However, at this stage, the Dinas Powys bypass has no status in terms of planning policy. It's not identified as a scheme in the local development plan. I'm not aware that there is any funding secured and delivered for it. The reason why it's not in the local development plan is because there was no funding identified for it. There was no realistic prospect of it coming forward during the life of the plan, certainly in the drafting of the LDP and through the examination, and that's why it's not in there. In simple answer to your question, therefore it would be completely unreasonable to condition that no development could take place until something that isn't even on the cards happens. And in any event, I would say it's unnecessary for all the reasons set out in the officer's report in terms of the acceptability of the scheme based on current levels of infrastructure and access provision.
We'll no doubt get to that in the debate. Any other questions or clarification from the committee? Thank you, Mr. Harrod. And I'll call for Mr. Roger Pattenden. You'll have 2 minutes when you're ready.
The LDP encourages developments to be easily accessible for walking and cycling, but the Murch Crescent access road has a gradient of 1 in 9, far steeper than the manual for streets permits. Everyone accepts that the Murch Road Cardiff Road junction will be well over capacity in the future, with severe traffic congestion made worse by traffic from this site. Barrett's consultant RPS predicts queues of well over 100 cars at the junction by 2028. The LDP requires the applicant to mitigate this huge impact, but RPS says that the site will only add a few more cars, so that's not a problem. Without mention that a bypass could fully solve the problem, the only proposed mitigation is an unenforceable travel plan for the site's residents that's never likely to result in a significant modal shift out of cars. Given all the evidence, it is scandalous that the Council's Highway Authority made no objection to this application. I submit you have these choices. First, accept the officer's recommendation and pass the application because it's listed in the LDP, while ignoring non-compliance with LDP policies. Second, treat these non-compliances seriously and reject the application. Note that Planning Policy Wales states that where a developer fails to show they can adequately mitigate the impacts of their development, it is likely that the application will be refused.
Thank you very much, Mr. Patterson. Any members of the committee wish to ask any clarifying questions? No, thank you, sir. If you want to step down. I'm going to call forward the members of the Vale of Glamorgan Council who would like to speak on the matter but who are not members of planning. And further to that, before we enter the debate, I'll ask the officers to come back on any technical points that have been raised so that we can gather themes together and make sure all angles are covered. So first off, can I have Councillor Stephen Griffiths, please? When you're ready, Councillor, you'll have 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. For the Planning Committee to even consider passing this application as it stands would be one of the worst decisions ever made of individuals, the committee collectively, and indeed this council. It has been clearly stated in the local development plan that there has to be sufficient traffic infrastructure in place. But as many of you know from visiting the site today, that there is no way that you can say that the area at this present time could sustain firstly the construction traffic, and secondly the day-to-day traffic after the houses are built. Imagine the precedent that would be set if you vote the planning application through today without serious conditions in place. Every future planning application in the Vale, regardless of its location, traffic capacity and population density after the St Cyrus site would be built on, would be far simpler to pass. It only takes the bending of the rules once. Remember, the next housing development may be in your backyard. I'm not against the building of new houses in and around Dinas Powys. In fact, I support the building of new houses because it builds the prosperity within the village. Of course, we need houses for our children. I'm only asking for the building site to be stalled until the required road infrastructure is put in place. This will not only allow construction traffic to pass through unhindered, but it would also cater for the additional cars the new housing would bring along with it. It is plain to see that the officers have thrown the rulebook out the window in regard to this development. Someone is more interested in recouping the money for the site and the welfare of the residents around the area in Dinas Powys. This is not the council acting on behalf of the Vale. Please, everyone on the planning committee, do what is right, act as an individual which you're entitled to do, stand up and be counted, not only for Dinas Powys, but the Vale and your constituents. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Griffiths. Any member of the committee wish to ask any clarifying questions? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that, Councillor Griffiths. The principle of development on this site was passed in the local development plan in June 2017, which you supported, and it did not include a bypass. I'm just wondering what's changed in the past 6 months on this issue.
Well, as one of the things that we've been trying to pass through is the Welltag Stage 2, along with the bypass as a possible, along with the multimodal. So one of the things we have to make sure is that the infrastructure includes the bypass for that. So nothing has changed. It's just making sure that the infrastructure is in place before the houses start getting built.
I think we'll deal with that in the debate about Welltag. I think we've clarified what he meant about the connection with this development. Is there anything else you want to clarify?
Yeah, just to clarify, we've heard officers discussing the possibility of delay until the bypass is built. I'm just clarifying what you're expecting us to do this afternoon as a committee with regard to this application.
I would prefer, as part of the bypass steering group, their suggestions that we stall the building of the dwellings on St Cyrus until the bypass is in place, or at least there's the planning and everything's in place before the houses.
Okay, thank you. Any other members wish to clarify anything? Okay, call forward Councillor Vincent Bailey. Councillor Bailey, you will have 3 minutes when you're ready.
If I could first of all thank committee members for allowing me the opportunity to speak on this item. It won't have escaped your attention that I'm not a Dinas Powys councillor. Indeed, I am here speaking as much on behalf of Barry residents and indeed residents of the wider Vale in opposition to this application. If you'll indulge me, I'll boil my arguments down to a few key points. I won't be treading too much on the ultra-local stuff. There are people who can argue that far more eloquently than myself. However, it should be noted the impact that such a development would have on overcrowding and the stress and strains on public services in the area. Instead, my arguments are more strategic. It is my view that it's inconceivable to permit development on this site, a site widely considered to traverse the most suitable route for a Dinas Powys bypass. The surrounding area, indeed the entire Vale, suffers from a blight of chronic congestion, and local residents already suffer terrible air quality due to slow-moving traffic. And it is my view that failure to take action to address that congestion will place residents in future at an even greater risk of poor public health. Turning to congestion, I've heard it argued that this development won't make a catastrophic difference to congestion in the region. I think people would acknowledge that we already suffer gridlock on a daily basis. If this development and adding hundreds of new cars to the mix won't make things worse, it's because they can't get any worse. Furthermore, it should be noticed that the bypass does form part of the council's application for City Deal. This is an application of strategic significance to the entire region, and I believe that it is the duty of the authority and this committee to refuse to grant permission, planning permission, until all viable options have been explored to progress that vital piece of infrastructure. I don't think Newport Council would be looking at building homes on the edge of the Black Route in terms of improving the M4 in that area, and I don't think we should do the same here. We have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to unlock the economic potential of this region and to relieve local residents of this daily blight. We mustn't allow this application to sabotage that chance. Now, finally, if I could just make one more observation. It is my view, and it's my hope, that members of this committee will listen to the arguments made not just by myself but by others in and amongst the committee, members of the public who've spoken eloquently, and that they will not allow this application to progress. However, if it is in your wisdom that you believe it should progress, I would ask, like others have, that this be delayed until all aspects of the bypass have been explored, or indeed that an aspect, a slither, a piece of this land is held back, the piece that is widely considered to traverse the most suitable route for a bypass. We owe it to future generations to get the Eastern Vale moving again, and we will not be forgiven by local residents if we blow that one chance at making progress.
Thank you, Councillor Bailey. If you hold on 2 seconds. Any questions of clarification on what's been said by Councillor Bailey? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you. The Arcadis have prepared an alternative route to the bypass. I was wondering what difference that makes to Councillor Bailey's assertions there.
This is within the report, the stated route not being impinged by the site. Councillor Bailey?
There will be discussion over a number of different routes, no doubt. I've heard a most persuasive case be that this piece of land does impinge on that route, on the best possible route. However, at this stage, we shouldn't be taking steps as a council to make such a vital piece of infrastructure not viable. We should be leaving all options open, and we own this land. We have the power to make that choice.
Thank you very much. Nothing else? Thank you. Councillor Andrew Robertson. When you're ready, sir, you'll have 3 minutes.
This is the Planning Committee of the Vale of Glamorgan Council. We have the officers who are here to advise, and we have you, the elected members, who are here to decide. The role of the officers is to expedite. They pour the lubricating oil of their knowledge, experience and hard work onto the machinery that progresses what they perceive to be the aims and objectives of this council. They are like a great locomotive steaming down a railway track. A track made up of rules and regulations, of protocols and procedures. They cannot be derailed. Believe me, we've tried. They're feeling pretty happy at the moment. They feel confident that this particular journey is about to pull into its destination. They can see the terminus just up ahead, the final station. I can see it too, and the name on the platform reads Misery for Dinas Paris. However, between the locomotive and the station, there is a set of points. You, the elected members, elected to represent and safeguard the interests of the citizens and communities of the Vale of Glamorgan, you have your hands on the lever that operates those points. If you pull that lever, you will set the locomotive on a new course, a course where the tracks are made of joined-up thinking and of common sense. There's a station on this new line, and it is called Well-being for this and future generations, safeguarded in Dinas Paris. Well, it is a Welsh station. The officers may be a little startled by the unexpected change in scenery, but as we have already heard, their job is to expedite, and they're very good at it. They will cope, and the world will go on turning. You have already heard all the very real, very strong, and very valid arguments for why you should pull that lever. This isn't NIMBYism. No one is saying never, just not until the necessary infrastructure has been put into place. Okay, you might say, if we've heard all the arguments, then why are you here? Well, I'm here to represent the citizens of my community, my village, Dinas Paris. On their behalf, I'm here to say to you, don't do easy. Don't be a rubber stamp. I'm asking you to be brave. Don't do expedient. That's their job. Do what you were elected to do. Do right. Pull the lever. Defer this permission until such time as the correct infrastructure has been put in place, or if that is not possible, then reject it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Any member of the committee have any clarifying questions? We'll no doubt enter into a lively debate shortly. Any clarifying questions? No. Thank you, Councillor Robinson. And finally, I call forward Councillor Driscoll. You will have 3 minutes when you're ready. Yeah, when you get there.
Okay. Thank you all for letting me speak. Okay, as you've probably understood from the previous speakers, not many people here are against the development of the new houses. In fact, most of them probably for it. It's because Dinas Paris is a great place to live. It's a real village community We've got great pubs, great shops, good sports facilities. We've got the common, we've got the woods, we've got miles of footpaths. But we've got a huge transport problem. 80% of the people in Dinas Powys work in Cardiff. The trains are overloaded, the traffic's horrendous, the buses are obviously too slow. We've got no cycle paths. We've got 2 of the worst junctions in the Vale. I was very surprised to hear, well, I knew it already, that they were at capacity, and yet we're still preparing to go over capacity. I'm not sure how that will work. Something needs to be done to solve this problem, not add to it. Being such a good place to live, it's obvious people want to live there. I've got 3 grown-up children. They all want houses, and they all want to live in Dinas Powys. Personally, I have no problem with building on the site, even though I live very close to it. But as the only access being through Merch Crescent, it's not right. The other options should be looked at first. The infrastructure first, then houses make sense. All the road studies that show Dinas Powys roads are overloaded are constantly updating, as every week more houses in Barry are released, adding to the problem. The LDP, the much aligned LDP, was introduced in June, imposing 10,000 houses on the Vale. And it's right that Dinas Powys should have some. I'm not disputing that. But the LDP is a very thorough document and is constantly referred to and abided by. Section 7.26 states that where a developer fails to show they can adequately mitigate the impact of the development, it is likely the application will fail. If this application is successful, then it will only add to the horrendous scenario of 3 building sites. Nothing's been mentioned earlier that there's 2 other building sites being passed, one in Cullion for 75 houses and one in Cross Common for 50. These sites will all be built at the same time. It will be living hell for 4 years for the residents of Dinas Powys, especially those of the Merch and Merch Crescent and Merch Road. No one should have this awful situation inflicted upon them. I recommend that this application is turned down.
Thank you, Councillor Driscoll. Any questions or clarification from the committee? Okay. Thank you, Councillor. And I'll call forward Mrs. Zoe Aubrey of Barratt Home, South Wales, speaking as the representative of the applicant. When you're ready, Mrs. Aubrey, you'll have 6 minutes.
Dear Councillors, I thank you for your time this afternoon. My name is Zoe Aubrey and I am Planning Manager for Barratt Home, South Wales, and we strive to provide the highest standard of design, construction and customer service in the house building industry, delivering much needed housing for people across the region. Now, turning to the site in question this evening, as Stephen has highlighted earlier, the site is allocated for mixed-use development within your adopted LDP for up to 300 residential units and a community recreational zone. And this allocation in itself confirms that the site is considered to be a sustainable location. Since entering into contract on the purchase of the site, we have engaged a professional team of consultants to bring forward the high-quality scheme before you today. You will note that the number of homes has declined to 215, which is primarily due to ecological constraints associated with dormice. Whilst I'm aware that concerns have been raised in relation to the proposed development on highway safety and capacity grounds, and some very scary figures have been stated tonight, I think we need to bring some context to this, because as confirmed in the TA, there will be less than 2 additional vehicle movements per minute in the AM peak and just over 2 additional vehicles in the PM peak generated from this proposed development. These levels of vehicle movements are considered to be very low, especially when distributed via the wider transport network, with the TA confirming that all junctions will operate within capacity, with the exception of the Merch Road, Cardiff Road junction. However, this traffic light junction is already forecast to be over capacity with and without the proposed development traffic, and hence the lengths of queues mentioned earlier will occur with or without this development. The Council have engaged independent expert advice from Mott MacDonald, who agree that the best form of mitigation is via sustainable transport contributions and improvements to cycling, walking and public transport network. And in line with this approach, nearly nearly £500,000 will be secured via a Section 106 agreement to contribute towards these measures. Furthermore, whilst it has been suggested that the use of sustainable transport measures is not sufficient to offset the impact of the proposed development, and the proposed development traffic should be offset by a new bypass, having reviewed the Vale of Glamorgan's local transport plan and the LDP, it is clear that the plan's focus are upon promoting healthier and more sustainable transport, and there is a clear policy preference to promote sustainable modes of transport in advance of the private car. And therefore, the Council's approach to seeking sustainable transport contributions is correct and fully justified in accordance with the local transport plan and LDP. Concerns have also been raised in relation to construction traffic. However, in this regard, through the implementation of our construction traffic management plan at a development just across the way at Sully Road, which again can only be accessed via one road, despite having been on site for over 18 months, we have received less than a handful of complaints, demonstrating through the measures that are used through, can come through the construction management plan, which include restricting the hours of delivery to exclude peak hours and school times, the provision of wheel washing facilities within the construction site, regular road sweeping, dust control measures, turning facilities for lorries within the boundary of our site, and ensuring contractors are informed that all deliveries should be loaded and unloaded within our demise. This works and it minimises disruption to local residents. In relation to the potential Dinas bypass, we entered into a conditional contract on the site with the LPA, being aware that there was not sufficient certainty over the delivery of the bypass, and this is going back now 3 years. So in this time, no more certainty has been given to the Dinas bypass, and hence the line was not protected on the LDP proposals map, and in accordance with Planning Policy Wales, the line was removed so it minimises blight. Furthermore, whilst the bypass is currently subject to a well-tagged study, work undertaken by Arcadis confirms that the bypass can still be implemented despite our development, and I urge you not to refuse the application on this issue because it is simply not justified. In terms of impacts on local facilities and services, the development includes in excess of £2.7 million towards education, public open space, community facilities and public art, in addition to 86 affordable housing units. In conclusion, we welcome the officer's recommendation for approval, and it is considered that there are no sound planning reasons to refuse this application on an allocated site, and I urge you to grant planning permission for our application before you tonight. Furthermore, a refusal would result in an existing allocation failing to come forward, which would have consequential impacts on the delivery of housing, contrary to policies SP3 and MG2 of your adopted LDP. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Aubrey. Any members wish to ask any clarifying questions on what's been stated? Councillor Parker.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As you know, this is a hybrid application with 40 conditions.
Can you just put, for the benefit of those who are watching this online?
As you are aware, this is a hybrid application with 40 conditions. The main concern... It is on. It is on, yeah. Is that better? This is a hybrid application with 40 conditions. The one that concerns us all quite clearly is the traffic management condition, and I would ask you, would you be prepared to consider bringing that condition forward well in advance of discharging all the other ones, so that it could actually come to this committee and to the residents for consideration prior to discharge of all the other conditions?
I wouldn't count that as clarifying question necessarily, but in consultation with officers, we'll deal with that in the main debates if that's possible.
You know, we don't have any objection to that in principle. Clearly, the council only requests a pre-commencement condition. They can't really condition it further, that we have to submit it within 4 weeks of consent, etc. But, you know, we are happy to engage with people during the production of that construction, you know, management plan, and we're quite happy to share it's a publicly available document, the one that was agreed at Sully Road across the way as a starting point.
Thank you. Any other members wish to ask some clarifying questions? Okay, thank you, Mrs. Aubrey, for your contribution. Vicky, there are a number of points obviously there. If you could cover those technical points, and then we'll move to the debate.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's probably best if we deal with each topic in isolation and then try and move our way through the debate, if that's okay, rather than me trying to address all of the issues. So I wanted to start with just talking about the Dinas Powys bypass issue, if I may, and Emma Reid is with us this evening as well, who may be able to shed a little bit more light for members just in terms of the WellTag process, because it has been alluded to that the Council is currently going through this process of looking at transport issues in the round in Dinas Powys, and I think it would be really useful, seeing as though Emma has sat through an hour of debate already, that she could perhaps enlighten us on where we are in that process. But first, if I can just draw members' attention through to pages 112 through to 115 of the Council's report, of the Officer's report, which deals with the issue of the Dinas Powys bypass. Now, I think it was Councillor Bailey particularly drew our attention to that matter in saying that the old route of the Unitary Development Plan bypass, the sort of land that had been reserved for a bypass, crosses over the site, and that's quite clearly shown on the plan on page 114, where you can see the site edged blue, covered by the land shown in red. Because of that concern that was raised by numerous objectors, we did specifically ask Arcadis consultants to look at that issue, and it was a matter that was first considered through the local development plan inquiry and examination, where officers did say to the plan inspector at that time that we felt that there was still sufficient land available between Dinas Powys and Penarth, that the allocation of this site and then the development of this site shouldn't preclude the future delivery of a bypass if it were ever to happen, if there was money available for it to happen. That's been firmed up by the work that's been done by Arcadis, and the plan on page 115 demonstrates not only that that there is land available for the route. I think it's also quite clear from that plan that actually the land take involved is actually quite a lot less than what the original sort of wide strip of red that was shown on the old Unitary Development Plan shows. This is just one option, and it happens to be the option closest to the development site. That's not to say that that's the only option. There would be several different alternatives, and Arcadis have looked at a few and said that there's several different options. This route has been done on some quite robust assumptions in terms of it being a 60-mile-an-hour road, and it meets all the relevant design standards for roads of that speed. And quite clearly it demonstrates that irrespective of this development coming forward, if there is feasibility and financing available to deliver a bypass in due course, then it can happen, subject to all the legal and planning processes that would involve. And this, so whereas Councillor Bailey did indicate, you know, I think he said that the previous route, the best route for the bypass, traverses the site. Well, I don't think there's any evidence whatsoever to suggest that the previous route was the best route, or that any significant feasibility work had been undertaken to suggest that that was the best route, and there are other routes available. So I hope that members can be reassured by that actually this certainly wouldn't be the death knell for the bypass if the bypass comes out of this WellTag process as being the right option, and if funding becomes available to deliver it. Certainly this development does not stop that from happening. But perhaps if I can ask Emma to come up and talk members through what the process is, what the timescales are for the assessment of transport proposals in Dinas Powys.
Yeah, thank you, Vicky. Just to advise committee that the red protected route that was on the Unitary Development Plan was actually not the route itself. It was actually a corridor of protection. And I think that's quite a key point, because corridors of protection are often a lot larger than the actual route which may or may not be progressed. But in terms of Arcadis's work, we are working at WellTag Stage 2, which is looking at an outline business case for 4 options. The first option is a do minimum, which means just basically doing what is happening in Dinas Powys at the moment and continuing on with what is happening, not putting any additional investment in. The second option we're looking at is the possibility of a bypass for Dinas Powys. The third option we're looking at is the possibility of just multimodal solutions. And the fourth option we're looking at, which was an option added by Cabinet, is a Dinas Powys and multimodal option. So as you can see, from those options, there's a lot of work that needs to be done by our consultants to come up with a draft report recommending which would be the best option to progress to a detailed business case, which would be the next stage. We're not at a stage to say what might come out of that study at this stage, but what we can confidently say tonight, and I know I have said this at the LDP inquiry, and I know Vicky said it at the LDP inquiry as well, is that the development of this site would not prejudice the future building of a Dinas Powys bypass, should that be an agreed option moving forward, and should there be funding, land, etc., for that bypass to be built. So from my professional perspective, I am comfortable that should this site proceed, there is still room for a Dinas Powys bypass if that is something that is progressed in the future. In terms of the WellTag Stage 2 work, we've had an initial meeting of a review group, and we are now moving to the next stage, which will be some form of consultation. That's the details of that have yet to be determined, but people of Dinas Powys and of other communities, because other communities will also be affected by any proposals that happen within Dinas Powys, whether that's in Cardiff or whether that's in Barry or whether that's in Penarth or Llandoch. They will have the opportunity to comment on those proposals and possible lines for a bypass. And they'll also be able to consider those in line with the economic benefits, social benefits, and how they fit with wellbeing objectives, which have already been mentioned this evening.
Thank you. I don't want to get into a debate about the Dinas Powys bypass, but does any member have any comment or question with regard to how anything that's been said in relation to this planning application before I ask Vicky just to move on to clarifying the other points? Leighton, Councillor Rowlands.
Yeah, Emma, I'm slightly confused in relation to if by building these houses, you're sort of limiting the option of the number of number of options for bypasses. So, say for instance, there's 3, and you build these houses, it's limited down to 2. Surely it's better to have more options than. I don't quite understand. If you just.
Thank you. The option that is shown to you in the committee report would be the nearest option that we would look at. The other options are likely to be further out. And in terms of the number of options, I know numbers have been mentioned this evening, but I couldn't tell you today if it's going to be 1 option, 2 options, 3 options, 4 options. So the route you see there is a route that would be the nearest option to the site. It's not precluding, because obviously if you came any further, you're going to affect even more possible areas. So for me, the plan that Arcadis have done clearly demonstrates that the Dinas Powys bypass can be built. It might not be built in that location, it might not be built full stop, but it can be delivered with that site being built.
Councillor King.
Thanks, Chair. It's just before Emma sits down, because I'm not sure it's Emma or Vicky's best place to answer, but looking to future generations, looking to the future, looking to the way that population and traffic and everything else grows,
if the Dinas Barris bypass comes to be, is there capacity, would it be possible to connect, let's say, Merch Road to that Dinas Barris bypass and therefore mitigate one of the major concerns of the ever expanding traffic in and around the village?
Thank you, Councillor King. Yes, we have asked the consultants to look at possible junctions on the bypass as part of their commission. So in theory, there may well be an option that shows a junction should a bypass be the proposed solution moving forward.
Vicky?
Sorry, it's just to build on the 2 points really, and it's a question of whether or not it's appropriate to stall this development pending whether or not a bypass happens or not. And this issue was dealt with through the LDP inquiry to a certain extent, and in planning policy terms, it's not appropriate to blight land indefinitely pending an infrastructure project that may or may not happen. I think that the plan that Arcadis have done and the work that they've done demonstrates that members can have some comfort that this certainly is not going to prevent the future delivery of a bypass, but certainly members you really shouldn't refuse a planning application on the basis of keeping as many options open as possible for various routes of a bypass, because what you're essentially doing is blighting land for a project that may or may not happen, and certainly at this stage there is absolutely no certainty that a bypass is going to happen, that there's going to be funding available and so on. And obviously Emma's discussed the various different options that are being considered through the WellTag process. It wouldn't be appropriate for us to preempt what the outcome of that process may or may not be. I think it's good enough for us as a planning committee and as officers to recommend to you to say, well, if the bypass turns out to be the best option, if funding's available, there's absolutely no reason why the two things can't happen, the development can't happen. Because the assessment in all other respects is that actually it doesn't need the bypass to make the development acceptable in terms of the access, then that is not a good enough reason to refuse planning permission because of the absence of a bypass at this stage.
Thank you, Emma and Vicky. In terms of the effect of the bypass and the relationship with conditions, are there any other questions from the committee with regard to that part of the application? Okay, Vicky, do you want to move on to the next section of points raised by the public?
Thank you, Chair. I think it's best now that we turn to deal with the general issue of traffic, the impacts of the development, not only in terms of construction traffic, but in terms of the future use of the site and the impact that that's going to have on the roads in the vicinity. And I think to do that, it's probably best as a starter, Stephen Arthur is with us, who is the transport consultant on behalf of Mott MacDonald, who worked on behalf of the council that assessed the traffic impact, the transport assessment that was submitted on behalf of the developers. They've undertaken the assessment and they've undertaken the conclusions that are set out in the report. So I think it would be useful for Stephen to just briefly explain that process and what the sort of assumptions that were used and what the conclusions of that were. And then I'll come back in then to discuss the way in which we've assessed the conclusions and the impacts and why we've come up with a recommendation, if that's okay. So I'll hand you over to Steve.
Okay, Stephen, thank you.
Thanks, Vicky. Just to introduce myself, Stephen Arthur from Mott MacDonald. I remain sort of impartial and undertook a technical review of the transport assessment submitted with the planning application on behalf of Highways. I think there's 2 points that I'd just initially like to sort of touch upon. The first, a couple of questions a couple of people raised. I think that a simplistic calculation based on 2 vehicles per property and assumed the number of vehicles that would then be generated from the new development. Just to clear up on that point, the transport assessment has undertaken an appropriate and sort of robust methodology. It's too simplistic to say that 2 vehicles will leave in and out in the peak hour. What they have done, they've actually taken an assessment of a local residential area over the peak hour period, and from that they've gained trip rates, which they then applied to their development. And what that looks at is the number of vehicles that will actually enter and leave the development over that peak hour period. Some will, of course, leave prior to the sort of network peak, if you like, and some will leave after. So the numbers they have are robust, and they are a true reflection of what we expect or what is forecast for that development. I think then the second point, which is worth clarifying again, is the assessment and certainly of the merch signals. Well, let's start at the development. The development itself, the access roundabout has been assessed and is well within capacity. The junctions, as far as the merch signals, have been assessed, and they will operate existing and future well within capacity. The merch itself, it has been identified at current levels, it's at about capacity as it stands now. With background, sort of natural background growth, if you like, that junction will start to suffer from congestion and become over capacity. When you then apply the proposed development trips, it will push that further over capacity, albeit by a relatively small amount when it's taken in consideration to natural background growth. So the sort of numbers I think that are being referred to and the cues that were mentioned, yes, they are correctly reported. However, much of that, or a significant amount of that, is occurring because of natural traffic background growth and a problem that either exists already or will occur with or without development. Therefore, the conclusions of the transport assessment are that the best form of mitigation would be to consider more sustainable measures and provide more sustainable links, routes, bus and train opportunity, primarily because of the restrictions to improving the merge signals itself. So I think that's the key issues, Vicky.
Yeah, thank you. So, so the conclusions of the study echo the concerns that have been raised by residents and by councillors, that the traffic situation in Dinas Powys is far from ideal. The junctions and the traffic along Cardiff Road, particularly in the peak, is already a problem and will continue to be a problem, and no doubt the additional traffic from this development will add to that. And this goes back to a certain extent, the strategic allocation of the site in the first place. So those issues were obviously already considered when the site was allocated for housing in the development plan, not forgetting it was allocated for far more than 215 units. I think it was allocated for 300 off the top of my head, but more in any event. And so I'd like to, if you will indulge me, to just discuss very briefly the broader terms of why we allocate housing, how much housing we need to allocate in the Vale of Glamorgan and why we do it. We have to find 10,000 new homes across the plan period, and they have to be located across a range of areas, taking into account a whole different set of factors, reusing brownfield land, access in terms of sustainable locations, where highest levels of housing need are, and so on and so forth. There's a hierarchy of settlements, and it's fair to say that Dinas Powys is one of the more sustainable settlements in the Vale of Glamorgan. As set out in the report, this site in particular has you know, a lot of facilities on its doorstep within 10 minutes walk. And if I can turn your attention to page 120 of the report, there's a whole list of public transport options and local facilities, schools, community facilities and shops, all within a 10-minute walk of this site. And I think there's a lot of LDP allocations and housing sites out there that would envy those kind of statistics in terms of location and accessibility and sustainability credentials of a site. So we have to find sites for appropriate housing, and what we can't do is just say no to all housing until all the problems to do with our infrastructure and our road network are completely resolved. That's something that we simply can't do. This housing site was allocated in light of all these factors, in light of all the assessment, and with an assumption that actually the people that live here and the people that live in the area of Dinas Powys do have alternatives to using their car. They have very good train services, and they have bus services, and they have local shops and facilities, you know, which many other towns and locations in the Vale of Glamorgan do not. And we can't not allow housing development forever and a day until our roads are absolutely, you know, there's no problems on them whatsoever. So this is one of those locations where we would argue there are genuinely real alternatives to the car. In addition, the sustainable transport contribution of, I think it's 400 and something thousand, just shy of £500,000, which can be used to improve access to the site for public transport, for cycling, for walking, to encourage people to undertake that modal shift. And for all those reasons, the site was allocated for housing in the LDP, and that is why we are suggesting that housing in this scale of these numbers is okay in this location on this site, and it's an issue that I would guard against revisiting through the planning application, because those issues have already been assessed and considered to be acceptable in terms of the principle of allocating the site for housing development. I think that probably covers it. I can see people are eager to speak. So.
I've had 4 people who've indicated to me they'd like to speak. First, Councillor Bird.
Thank you, Chair. Just before we go off the traffic issue, I'd like to ask the question, has the removal of the school and the amount of traffic that generated been taken into account in the traffic figures, and how much did that, if so, how much did that change things?
The transport assessment used up-to-date surveys, so the removal of the school traffic has been included in the assessment. The base assessment does not include the old school traffic, if you like. So it's actually a valid point in that the merged signals has actually previously had to deal with the school traffic, which it's not included in the transport assessment, but would actually be quite considerable in terms of comparison to the development itself.
Councillor Thomas.
Yeah, it's simply did you include the Mary Harriers in your scope of assessment, and if so, what are your comments about that?
The Mary Harrier wasn't included in the scope, I believe, with the Vale of Glamorgan Council at the time. So the transport assessment goes as far as Station Road, Cardiff Road junction. It didn't go as far as the Mary Harrier. It didn't include it as far as a detailed assessment. Generally speaking, the sort of percentage impact, if you like, on a junction is often considered, and of course the level of traffic at the Mary Harrier is considerably higher than it is at the merged signals, and with the impact at the merged relatively low, and I know I'm using sort of general terms here, but with the impact relatively low, its impact then on the Mary Harrier was considered to be minimal, or arguably negligible. So,
Councillor Cave.
Thank you. I'm listening to what you've said, and I'm just wondering. You're saying that this junction is at capacity, and that this development will push this over capacity. Is that right?
That's right. The junction's at capacity as it is today, and background growth. So without the development, if within 2, 5, 10 years, the junction will be over capacity due to natural growth through other developments across the Vale nationally.
Okay, so this will actually if we pass this development, it will actually speed up the overcapacity of this junction.
Yes, the development trips from this development will impact on that junction, in line with other developments across the Vale.
Okay, thank you. So as our LDP is not a short-term plan, it's a long-term plan, I find it difficult. I know you're the experts, and I've absolutely no knowledge of engineering or anything to do with road development of any sort, but you're the experts who've obviously been called in to make the judgment about whether this is a suitable development, and I find it hard to sort of comprehend how pushing something over a limit would be deemed acceptable, because to general, naive novice people, one of the things that we're asking you to do is to look at if it is going to go over and make a recommendation based on that. So I'm wondering how much more would it have had to have gone over before you would have suggested that the development wouldn't have been acceptable to us?
That's a good question. It's a difficult question to quantify and answer. What is acceptable to one person and to another is completely different. In this instance, it was compared to the background growth, and I know I keep going back to this, but ultimately the development itself was contributing certainly to pushing the junction over capacity, but very minimal in compared to where it would be just through natural background growth. Whether or not it's acceptable is something that I couldn't answer directly, not having worked for the Vale, not being working for the Vale Council. What I can say and advise, and what I did in the review, is to say that yes, this location does provide genuine opportunity for sustainable links and travel in comparison to other sites. So it is a balance. It is a consideration. If there wasn't alternative sustainable modes of travel, if this junction was further west in rural Vale and it was just a local junction capacity issue, my recommendation would have been that it needs engineering infrastructure improvements to the junction to improve capacity. In this instance, I believe that A, it's difficult, almost impossible to improve the merge signals any further than it is, and B, an improvement would make very little difference, because it's the corridor, I think, as the conversation has led, and the bypass discussion is the Cardiff Road corridor to Cardiff with such a high flow. So in this instance, I'm not saying it's acceptable. What I'm saying is I think the sustainable mode and approach is the best approach in this instance, this application.
So I've got other...
I just need to come back on that because
point?
I have another point on that. So if it does all hinge on this sustainable transport model, then why are we allowing the development of garages on this site? Because one way we could absolutely say that there would be a much more higher take-up of sustainable transport, i.e. cycling and walking, if people that moved onto this site weren't allowed to come in the first place with cars. So that's maybe a question for Victoria.
I think it is a planning question, and your fourth supplementary. Vicky, if you'd like to answer that.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's a good point. And if you were to allocate the site in its entirety for housing with no parking, it's a question as to whether or not Barratt or any other major house builder would be particularly interested in developing a site where they weren't able to provide any parking for their customers. It's not just an issue for the residents of this site and surrounding, you know, and the people that are going to live here. It's an issue for all of us, for everybody that lives in urban areas, not only in Dinas Powys, but the whole of the Vale of Glamorgan and beyond, and that our road networks in Wales, in the UK, are clogging up because of you know, our reliance on the car and car use. And something has to change, and it's part of the planning system to address that and to say, if you start building houses in places like Dinas Powys where you've got options, at least people, if you know, if it takes you half an hour to get out of Merch Road because you can't sit in traffic for that long, you will use the train. You know, you will change your travel to work patterns. You know, that ultimately that is what planning policy is going towards. That's what our LDP seeks to achieve in terms of trying to encourage modal shift, rather than the American model of build more roads, build more roads, build more roads. Let's have 6, 7, 8 lanes so that everybody can have 3 cars. That's not the British model. You know, the Welsh planning policy context is actually you try to encourage people to use alternatives, and the ways in which you do that is to make sure there's available alternatives and to make sure that new houses are located in areas where people can use those alternatives.
Councillor Rowlands, I can come back to you, Councillor Cave, but as the questions were relating to the earlier point, we've moved on with the debate slightly. I don't want to lose any points. Councillor Rowlands?
Yeah, it's about the sustainable transport. You say, you know, you can get trains and go on buses, but when a train is cancelled or delayed, you know, most people likely use their car. You know I would, and we don't really have a great bus infrastructure in the Vale. So actually the policy sort of, you know, oh yeah, we'll push them in, you know, get them on public transport, doesn't really work into practice. And I'm concerned about that, and I don't know if you can come back with anything on that at all.
You know, it is a matter for planning committee to consider whether or not, you know, you endorse the approach that of what we're recommending to you ultimately. In Dinas Powys, train services operate every 15 minutes. I don't throughout the day and certainly during the peak. I don't have statistics as to how often those trains are cancelled or how often those trains are late. But I think most people would accept that 15-minute services to Barry and to Cardiff is actually pretty high frequency and offers a realistic alternative to the car. In addition to that, you also have bus services operating, running through to connect to Penarth, to Barry, along the Cardiff Road network, and obviously there is the sort of bus lane infrastructure that's been in place on Cardiff Road in the run-up to the Mary Harrier to try and alleviate sort of bus travel through the peak on that congested part of the network. In addition to that, you know, there are local facilities and local services. You know, people have the opportunity to walk their children to school, to walk to the local shops, to walk to the library, to walk to the community facilities and public open space. You know, and that is a trend that as a nation we're going to have to go towards unless we, you know, are basically saying you can't have any new housing. Forget all the people that are in housing need and that need somewhere to live. They can just suffer for the next 15, 20 years until we get all our roads in place where everybody who wants to get in their car can get in their car and can travel without any congestion and without any restrictions. And realistically, that is not going to happen. So what it comes back to, where do we put new housing? And if it's not in Dinas Powys, where there are all those facilities and the ability to use an alternative, then honestly, I don't know what the answer is, because that's why our plan allocates this site for housing.
Councillor Burnett.
Thank you. Just wanted to double check. I seem to remember we've talked about it previously being allocated for 300 properties. I've just did a quick check back. Back in 2012, it was actually, this site was allocated for 340. That was then reduced in the 2017 LDP, and then reduced because of the constraints of the site. So it actually has come down by a huge amount. I mean, I wasn't a councillor at that time, so other people will remember it better than I can. Similarly, around that time, when the reasons for it being allocated, it is an important site, both for housing but also for the school investment strategy. I'm assuming that it is one of the 8 sites that contribute to the school investment strategy as well. So, you know, there are a lot of reasons why this site has been an important site and had much discussion over the years. There was one query that came up earlier, and if I could double check on that, somebody asked whether or not a piece could just be sliced off. Now, I've been on my training and stuff, and my understanding is that that's not a possibility. We either decide or don't decide on a planning application, and we can't. It's not for us to make those sorts of decisions. So if that could be clarified, that would be good.
Yeah, it's certainly, you know, your duty here this evening is to determine the planning application that's in front of you and to make a decision on that. Not only that, I would say that it's not necessary for a piece to be sliced off if we're talking about for the provision of the bypass for all the reasons that I've already said.
Councillor Cave. Yes, if you would like to.
Yeah, if I'd like to, yes. So just clarifying some of the points that have been raised regarding the overcapacity of the junction, and I don't wish to keep labouring on about that. But I think it is a very important, you know, the main issue as to why there's so many people here today. And you've spoken very eloquently about the sustainable transport and why we should have that policy in Wales. And I was suggesting that if we want to really pursue that policy and make that policy happen, then perhaps we shouldn't be giving allocations to so many garages.
I think all I can say to that is, this is the proposal that is in front of us. Our parking standards have changed somewhat, and we're not applying them as minimum standards anymore. They are now maximum standards. I think the level of parking Steve alluded to earlier is slightly under in terms of the overall numbers for visitor spaces than you might expect on a site like this. But ultimately it is a matter of personal choice in terms of modal shift, and the travel plan that will be required through the development will go some way to encouraging people to not have cars, or to only have one car per household and that sort of thing, and to use alternatives to the car. So,
Councillor King.
Thanks ever so much. Just on that point about cars and garages, just a quick thought, and that was that my ward contains lots of places which were built before we all had 2.4 cars. Whilst it would give the developer a lot more properties, it would give an awful lot of cars struggling to park on the road, because it's not really whether we want cars or not. People do. It's where they keep them and for what they use them. I think that's the issue. Is we really want to persuade people to make that modal shift. I think that's a different goal. But the actual point I wanted to make was, from what I understand, there's been quite a lot of mitigation to this site already. I think Liz made some comments about even higher numbers originally. We're now down to about 215. We've got some 40 conditions on the site, so it's quite well. There's a lot of negotiation and agreement there. But we've been asked to either refuse or delay allowing development for a Dinas Powys bypass. Now, my understanding is that would be probably unlawful because there's just research going on. So to do that would be blight. That would risk going to appeal. That would possibly risk the council being fined, and that could even risk us losing some of those conditions along the way. So I'm very nervous of going down that path. We've also been asked to refuse or delay until we address the issues with the Merch junction in particular. But that tags on things like the general congestion in the vicinity, and air quality, and one or two other things have been mentioned. But we've got a highways report that says, whether we like it or not, this is the independently corroborated evidence, is that the impact of this development alone is probably too small to support overturning officer recommendation, which means I again suspect we could find ourselves being taken to appeal and maybe losing, having a financial penalty, and maybe losing some of the conditions. So the one that I'm aware of that it's been in the written documentation, but nobody's spoken about, and that was the sewage bit. And so I'm interested in are we satisfied that is to be addressed?
I think we were progressing through the subject matter, and Vicky was going to address the points raised by the public. So if we can hold that one just in reserve. I have two other councillors, Councillor Williams and Councillor Thomas. Okay, Vicky will answer the other points, and then we'll deal with sewage in a little bit.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Thomas, Vicky's answering.
Oh, sorry,
Vic. And then it'll be Councillor Williams before yourself.
Sorry, Councillor Thomas. I just wanted to respond to the point that Councillor King made about the conditions being potentially unlawful, or a decision to refuse being unlawful. I just want to clarify, it wouldn't be unlawful per se. Members are entitled to refuse the application if you want to. There need to be sound and good planning reasons for doing so. And if you refuse the application for grounds contrary to highways advice, for example, or unreasonably delay the development when it's an acceptable form of development that complies with policy, you run the risk of the developer appealing that decision and seeking an award of costs from the planning inspector if unreasonable behaviour is deemed to have happened in terms of making that decision. And members are obviously familiar with that process. I just wanted to clarify the legality of that issue.
Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to ask this question now. It seems quite insignificant in relation to, but it is about the number of cars from an estate. The representative has said doing the assessment didn't actually come and quantify the number of vehicles that was in the study. And so I'm being asked to make a decision based on a report which I haven't seen, and that quantity of number of vehicles, number of journeys, whatever, wasn't given detail. So I wondered if that could be given to us.
I would say the report's in the documents.
Okay.
We've got.
Can you specify the number of cars? If you discounted the number of cars that most people generally, number of properties, they say, oh, generally it'll be 2 cars per property. I think that's reasonable. I just wanted to know what the figure he came up with in this report.
Thank you, Steve.
Sure. Yeah, that information is contained in the transport assessment provided by the applicant. So in the AM, in the morning peak, there's expected to be approximately 70 vehicles departing from the development and 43 arriving. And in the PM peak, approximately 80 vehicles arriving and 70 departing.
Thank you.
It answers your question. Councillor Thomas.
Yeah, sorry about that earlier. We've spoken quite a lot about the putative bypass. What we haven't mentioned in terms of transport is the more further developed local regional sort of transport system, which will affect Dinas Powys as well as the rest of the region. And wondering whether there's any comment to be made on that, or whether that sort of will mitigate the whole transport thing in the future.
In terms of boosting the sustainable element, are you referring to Metro? Yeah. Okay. I don't know if Emma's more placed to talk about the relation to City Deal. We'll do a quick chair swap. I'm happy with its connection to the planning application in relation to sustainable transport. Emma, please. Thank you.
Thank you. The biggest thing happening in terms of the Metro and City Deal at the moment is the new franchise for the trains. That franchise, we should know the results of who the bidder's going to be in March this year, and we should then know in June what that actual work will comprise, and whether there will be any additionality or improvement on rolling stock on any of the Vale of Glamorgan line stations. And in terms of sustainable development per se, we've got a number of schemes that we've recommended forward for City Deal funding. You're probably aware of schemes that we've got in terms of Junction 34 with a similar well tag study ongoing. We've also looking for possible funding for whatever comes out of well tag Stage 2 for Dinas Powys, whatever that might be. And we also have funding for looking at basically a Penarth barrage, possible Penarth Headland link through to Cosmston Park and Ride scheme as well. We've just recently been given funding for that in December. So in terms of our role in the region, we have a number of very exciting projects ongoing. In terms of, I say, the main thing at the moment is the Wales franchise, and we won't know until May what that's actually going to mean for us. But what I would say in terms of sustainable transport, Dinas, and I know Vicky's already said this, but as a transport expert, Dinas is extremely well provided for in terms of both bus services and in terms of train services. Now, I do know there are some capacity issues at peak times, but I would be hopeful that the developments that are being looked at with the new franchise will help relieve some of that.
Thank you, Emma. If we could bring the focus back to the planning application, but I think that was a very useful intervention. If we move on to Councillor King's point about sewage and perhaps explore some of those questions within the technical notes. Stephen?
Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, the report in pages 127 to 129 details at quite some length drainage issues relating to surface water and relating to foul sewage as well. As always with a major application, Welsh Water were consulted on the application. they raised no objection. There was initially discrepancy in some of the details, but they've concluded that there's no objection, subject to some quite onerous conditions really set out in condition 33, 34, in relation to the drainage of the site, principally if the concern is about foul, is setting out the point of connection, which is identified by a hydraulic modelling assessment, which looks at capacity in the sewage network. And also they're identifying that the actual point of connection of the foul sewage into the system, again, that's informed by their assessments. So again, the penultimate paragraph 128, or the Welsh Water paragraph, they've confirmed that there's no concerns in terms of capacity of the treatment works. And really, from a drainage point of view, there are no concerns. I know some issues were raised this morning about some local incidents that have taken place in Dinas Powys. Welsh Water were aware of those, but those weren't in any way connected or would impact on the drainage proposals within the site. And again, just touching on the surface water issue, again, there are conditions that relate to greenfield runoff, management of surface water during construction process. Again, those are set out in conditions 35 and 37. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Any other questions with regard to drainage and sewage? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you for that, Stephen. I've just wanted to re-clarify some of the points you've just raised, because I was looking back at the previous reports that we've had on the site, or when during the deposit stage, where Dual Company Welsh Water did raise a couple of queries about about saying that the local sewer network is too small to accommodate the foul flows from this development, and a hydraulic modelling assessment be required to establish the point of connection. You're saying that is now agreed and in place, and also that the Cogmore's wastewater treatment works, which we were told at the time had limited capacity, have now that's all been completed, and that's already would be ready to go from from the get-go, as it were, if construction took place.
Not exactly, no. There's the condition requires, so we haven't had a HMA in yet. With some developments, we would have a HMA in up front, which is a hydraulic modelling assessment. So Welsh Water have looked at this. They consider this as a site that you wouldn't necessarily need a HMA in up front. So they're happy to condition that the point of connection is established through a hydraulic modelling assessment. And the beauty of that is that's done kind of closer to the development being constructed, rather than being done a year or 2 years prior to that, in which case capacity issues may well change. So from their point of view, they're happy with that approach. And again, as I said, the local treatment works, I assume it's Cogmore's, there's no capacity issues there either.
Yes, Councillor Johnson.
So obviously, further up, the geography of the site is that it's at the top, and people at the bottom are the ones who tend to have problems whenever there's runoff. So we had recent issues, sort of around the housing estates near the railway. I'm just, sort of want to, I mean, it's difficult to give assurances, especially from, without the engineering work having taken place, but people naturally have concerns about that. And I always, this is in English, but I remember once, talking to somebody who'd been flooded in a street called Aranant, which means on the stream, and said, well, maybe there's a clue in the name there, not in an unkind manner. But we also have something in the area called Watery Lane. So I'm just wondering, kind of where that is on the, in terms of the geography of the site, and sort of what mitigation effects will be put in place around there, because I think it's fairly inevitable that there'll be, when we have a 1 in 30, a 1 in 50, or a 1 in 100, flooding incident, then it'll be running down to the people at the bottom. So I think I'd like some information or assurances on that.
Thank you. It's a valid point. We've had a number of meetings with the council's drainage team, with the developers. If you look at the site, the southeast corner of the site, where you've got that small area of open space which kind of backs onto Watery Lane, that is the lowest part of the site, and I believe that's currently the wettest part of the site. Now that's where they're proposing to put attenuation tanks to deal with the surface water side. Again, in relation, we have actually got, it's quite a technical drawing, but it's a drawing that shows overland flows, I believe, Find it. No. Yeah, there is a plan. So with our drainage team, they look at all scenarios. They look at the 1 in 30, the 1 in 100 plus climate change. So they look at, if for example the worst case scenario that the manholes can't take things, they then look at overland flows. So they look at where the water will flow on surfaces, whether it will flow into front gardens, back gardens. I'm sure there's a plan. Yeah, this is one of the plans that details the overland flows. So from a developer's point of view, we feel that they've shown provided enough information so far. There is more information that is required to be submitted, which is typical of every major application, particularly with calculations, sort of quite complex calculations. But inevitably, they can only often come in once we get idea of full details of levels. As with all the drainage conditions, they're subject to consultation with Welsh Water, with the council's drainage team, with the highways team as well. Everything's kind of linked together. So invariably, on all sites, drainage becomes quite a complex issue, and you know, we have gone through the drainage at quite a lot of detail on this scheme. But say the officers are satisfied that the conditions attached to those to the report covers the drainage issues, and for all of the drainage service areas, if you want to call them that, they're satisfied that the conditions will do their job. Thank you.
Thank you. Just ask Vicky to speak now on some potential changes.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make members aware of just some technical tweaks to the officer recommendation. So the recommendation was to approve the application subject to the necessary interested persons entering into a Section 106 legal agreement. It should actually refer to a Section 111 agreement because of the nature of the land in terms of the council being the owner. It's not a normal Section 106 process. So just for clarification on that.
Sorry, under 111. Sorry. Yeah, just to clarify that, what the Section 111 agreement is a separate agreement, which basically will mean that the developer will agree to enter into a Section 106 at the point where it takes ownership of the land, because the planning permission will attach to the land rather than any individual person, and the council can't enter into a 106 with itself. In order to ensure that it binds the freehold of the land, it needs to go through that route.
Sorry, thank you, James. That was much more eloquent than I could have said it. But I also wanted to draw your attention to, Steve referred earlier to a slight tweak to condition 17, which is the condition that requires full engineering details of all the visions, plays, etc. We want to insert a reference there to also require details of any necessary traffic regulation orders, and also condition 24, which relates to the construction traffic management plan, to be explicit in there that we expect where it talks about timings, that those timings need to have regard to the peak traffic flows and the school traffic flows, depending of course on where the route for construction traffic is actually agreed. It may not be relevant in respect of the school if it's not going past the school. So just to clarify, that's what officer's recommendation is in respect of those little tweaks. Okay.
Councillor Bird.
Yes, Chair. I think we've debated this long and hard, and I'm at a point where I feel I'm ready to make a decision, so I would like to move officer's recommendation.
Do you have a seconder for that moving? Councillor Parker. Yeah, briefly, and then I'll bring in Councillor Johnson.
No, what I would second it, but what I would ask is that conditions 20 and 24 be brought back to committee. That's the highway condition, and 33, 34, 35, 36 and 37 also be brought back at the appropriate time.
Thank you. Note that, and the mover of the motion's happy to accept that from the seconder. Yeah. Okay. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. There are still issues I would be interested in following regarding Sunnycroft Lane and regarding the the access there, because it is as we saw earlier on today, it's actually something that an area would be quite dark and perhaps not friendly to public use after dark in order to access the I'm trying to work it out, the western side of the site, and that's actually given as the nearest point for many of the public transport locations, for example, Dinas Powys train station, Place Essex, etc. So I would like some more information on that, but subject to the sort of the fact that this has been moved, I'd like to move a rejection to this application, having listened to the debate today, visited this morning, read the reports that on the grounds of the current inadequate and unsatisfactory transport infrastructure in Dinas Powys.
So, in terms of the points with regard to the footpaths and nighttime use, Vicky or Stephen? Stephen.
Yeah, as we saw this morning, I think we've perhaps got to look back at NRW. This area, and there's two issues really. We've got the areas shown on the plan between the ends of the houses and the parking area and the top of Sunnycroft Lane, which will effectively be a mown area of grass, which will be enclosed by post and wire fencing either side, which is just to provide the notional route out through the development. So the whole idea is it's meant to be an informal route. Introduction of items such as lighting brings out issues with respect to impact on bats, etc. There also becomes the issue of who would be responsible for that lighting, and then pressure perhaps for the council then to adopt this route, and it wouldn't be a route that would be to an adoptable standard, for example, an adoptable footpath. So we take the point, and the issue is Sunnycroft Lane, not sure members are aware, but it's a private road. It's a private road which happens to have a bridleway down it. So the bridleway is effectively the same kind of status as a public footpath. So I mean, there are no proposals. There's certainly proposals to enhance the route. We're not sure whether those enhancements would perhaps stretch to lighting, but if it were stretched to lighting, there would still be the section within the site which wouldn't be lit. I think that probably has to be accepted as a balance, particularly when balanced against the sort of ecological considerations of the site.
Thank you, Stephen. Any other members have a question? I've got Councillor Cave first, and the debate's not over because the motion's come forward, but Councillor Cave, your question.
Yes, I've just got a point of clarity for myself. I'd like to ask Emma Reid a question, if I may. Is that possible to
go
do
ahead.
that? Yes, I just want to ask Emma. Obviously, there's been a lot of discussion about this particular development pushing this road infrastructure over capacity, and we had some clarification about that, and I spoke about that earlier. But I'm just wondering, obviously, if this was to be passed, if this development was to go ahead, and as we've already heard, it would push the junction over capacity. Does it mean that it would be more likely that we would have the Dinas bypass than less likely? I know it's a very difficult question for you to answer, but I don't know anybody else here that could possibly have a little stab at it for me. Thank you.
Emma.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Chair. I can't answer that, but what I would say is that this is what I call a sustainable transport location for housing. The evidence that I've seen as a transport professional does show that the junction will be at capacity, but there are lots of junctions that are at capacity, and some far more worse than this junction. So in terms of the Dinas Powys, because the study's looking at the Dinas Powys network, it's not looking at Barry, it's not looking at Penarth, it's looking at the Dinas Powys network, and it's a particular study to look at what we can do to improve transport in that area. So I would be hopeful that that study will lead to improvement in transport facilities in Dinas Powys. Now, whether that's train, cycling, walking, or a bypass, I couldn't answer that tonight, but I'm hopeful that the study will leave us some funding to improve transport in that location.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Hodges.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to develop a point that Councillor Johnson made on the highways and traffic issues with the site coming out to Sunnycroft Lane, the west of the site. He's quite right on page 120. The suggestion is that we need to mitigate against the cars by discouraging private car usage, improve the infrastructure and support more sustainable modes of transport such as cycling, walking, and it goes on, public transport. But if you're cycling and walking off-site through the west for the railway stations, Dinas Powys, and for the bus stops, and for the schools, I would like a lit site, and I'd like a clearly marked site. Now it says here that walking and public transport to be delivered using utilising sustainable contribution monies agreed as part of the 106 planning process. So I think if you want a trendy, all singing, all dancing site for people to live on and discourage car use, I think you've really got to develop the west of that site, which is where you are literally signposting people to leave and come back on. It's a lovely site, but it needs developing, and you need to do something, I think, to encourage future residents, if this is built, to actually use that and to discourage car usage. But saying that, I will second rejection.
Thank you, Councillor Hodges. Does Stephen want to answer on that point?
Yes, if I may. Initial discussions with NRW, this route wasn't in there. Officers wanted the route to provide the link via Sunnycroft Lane into the village. NRW weren't happy with it. We fought tooth and nail to get this route in. The only route that we could get was an informal, unlit route, unmade, effectively a moan. That's as much as NRW would allow because of the mitigation. So even though it may look like a far from ideal route not being lit, I mean, ideal world, every route would be lit and would be hard surface. But from an NRW's point of view, it's either this or it's nothing. So unfortunately, we have to sort of look at the balance of the site as a whole, as Vicky has previously set out. So there are opportunities, I think, certainly in the Sunnycroft Lane to make those enhancements to the bridleway, but actually within the site, we are significantly restricted to what we can do.
Vicky?
I don't mean this to sound at all flippant, but there is such a thing as a torch. And, you know, you can use, just something being dark doesn't mean that you can't walk there. And I appreciate during the winter, it gets dark early in Dinas Powys. And, you know, it would necessitate, you know, people using their initiative really and, you know, carrying some form of lighting, I guess, with them so that they can lit the path.
I think we've bottomed out the nature of that path in respect of whether members feel they can support the motions. Any other member wish to comment at all with regard to this? If not, I will move to the first motion in front of us, which is to move officer recommendations, obviously with all the caveats that have been discussed and included. Okay. Sorry, before I do that, Vicky wants to say something?
Sorry, it was only in relation to the amendment that Councillor Parker suggested in terms of the conditions, and I'm not sure in terms of the process whether or not that needs to be voted on as an amendment to the main recommendation, but as an officer I just want to you know, have a note of caution in terms of members calling in condition matters such as this to committee. Obviously you're entitled to do it, and you'd be entitled to do it on any condition discharge application as and when they're received. But in terms of, you know, the sort of committee agenda and the level of information that comes to you as a committee, I wouldn't be encouraging officers to, members to be requiring that these kind of technical condition details come before you for your approval, particularly on these sort of matters where, you know, they are very technical and they rely on our sort of drainage engineers and Welsh Water and so on agreeing those details. So it's a word of caution from my point and nothing more, and I'll just leave it there as to whether or not how committee feel about that that amendment really.
We don't have to take it as a separate amendment motion. So as stated by Councillor Burden, seconded by Councillor Parker, all those in favour of moving officer recommendations, please raise your hands. 11. All those against? 3. Any abstentions? I think that was everyone. That motion carries. Thank you very much for everyone's participation in the debate. I'm going to adjourn the meeting for 5 minutes for a brief comfort break before we move on to the next application to allow people to leave the chamber and so forth. Reconvene at 6:15. If I can encourage members to come back to the table. I realise the toilet facilities were closed off and it took a little bit longer, so if we could all gather back. Okay, guys, if we could take our seats, please. I think we're all back in the chamber now. And thank you for your patience in the public gallery, those waiting for the St Athan application, as that's the next one we're going to be looking at. Have we got everyone here? Okay, moving on to planning application 2017/00066/FUL, Tathan Hall, 6 Rectory Drive in St Athan. I believe Vicky's going to talk about this one.
Thank you, Chair. Again, thanks to those members that came out on site this morning to St Athan to have a look at this one. I'll just draw your attention to the matters arising papers as well. We had some additional information from the applicant setting out some visuals of the proposed development, and they're in the bundle that will have been circulated to you by email yesterday as well. Briefly, the application before us is to convert the existing Grade 2 listed building, which is a building at risk on the CADU's register, to convert that into 7 flats, 6 2-bed and 1 1-bed flat, and then to construct 9 houses within the curtilage of the site, as shown on the plans up on the screen. Relatively traditional pitched roof designs, sort of echoing the sort of built form of the building itself, but the street along Rectory Drive is a mix of some 2-storey houses immediately at the entrance to Rectory Drive, and then it turns into bungalow properties. The application was assessed by our conservation officer specialist. He dealt with the application. He's satisfied with the works to the listed building in terms of retaining the character and original features and so on to preserve the building itself. And also satisfied that the houses proposed in the grounds are equally acceptable in terms of their impact on the setting of the listed building. There was some amendments through the proposed scheme to ensure that there was a visual break between the site and the adjacent church, and to keep that visual link between those 2 historic buildings, and also there's a sort of footpath connection between them. There have been concerns raised by residents. We've received a number of representations, and we did have quite a few members of the public on site this morning. A number of issues, but in particular car parking and the impact of the development of the site, the intensification of the use of the site, and the impact of parking, and what that might have on the residents of Rectory Drive. In terms of parking provision, the development proposes 1 parking space for each of the flats and 2 parking spaces for each of the houses. We consider that to be acceptable in this context in terms of where the site is. It's very close to the village of St Athan. There are public transport options, but also Rectory Drive itself has a degree of on-street parking capacity, which could potentially cater for visitors and so on. And we any overspill parking in that area is not considered to cause a highway safety issue. So our highway engineers haven't objected to the proposed development. The recommendation is therefore for approval of the development, subject to a Section 106 agreement. Sorry, I should have touched on the fact that we'd been through a viability appraisal on this site. As you might expect when we're talking about a listed building, there are constraints on the site and there are extreme development costs which have been assessed in this case, and we're satisfied the developer has demonstrated the case that there isn't actually any viability in terms of affordable housing or other Section 106 contributions. Bearing that in mind, though, and given the scale of development, what we wouldn't want to do is give an open consent that allows the developer to build the site out or to start construction and then wait for the market or costs or what have you to improve and benefit from a complete zero 106 package when in reality potentially in a few years time it could afford something. So we have recommended that there's a Section 106 agreement requiring the development to be complete and ready for occupation within 3 years of the planning permission. And members might recall there was an appeal decision that we discussed at last month's planning committee where this was the relevant point. So I think you'll be seeing this more and more where development viability is flagged up as an issue. We'll be using this kind of mechanism to ensure that developments get built within the context of which they've been assessed. And also subject to a number of conditions, including all the usual ones. I'm going to suggest that we add an additional one to that, which is for no development commencing, including demolition works, until a construction environmental management plan has been submitted to and approved in writing, and specifying the type of things that we would expect to see in that construction environmental management plan, which you'll all be familiar with, the sort of things that we're talking about: parking of vehicles for operatives, unloading plant and machinery and things like that, wheel washing, dust suppression measures, those sort of things. So I'm suggesting that we add that condition on. That's it.
Thank you, Vicky. Anyone wish to comment on the application? I certainly enjoyed visiting the site today and seeing it in context, and seeing the nature of the street as well. Any member wish to comment? Councillor Thomas.
Yeah, we didn't ask this one. How old's the site? Do we know how old the building is? We don't.
I'm sorry, I don't know. No, I'm afraid not. I can ask my conservation officer to drop you a line and let you know.
I believe, I mean, on site we were talking about some of the original building, I think, being sort of 500 years old in the order of that timescale. I'm not entirely sure. But in the context of it, it is listed and it needs, you know, it's an enabling application in terms of securing that listed building. Might be more like 400 or 300 years, but certainly old. Any other member? Councillor Bird?
If there's no debate to be had, I move officer's recommendation, Chair.
Seconded by Councillor Rowlands. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. I'm still happy we had the break. Planning application 2017/00497/FUL, Brynython Home for the Elderly, St Andrews Road in Dinas Powys. Stephen.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, this is application site. This is a former Brynython residential care home. So this is a retrospective planning application for the retention and completion of the development of 24 residential units of accommodation to be occupied by residents of 55 and over. The main issue with this application is probably just to go over the background and the planning history. So initially, the council-owned site was subject to application 2015. That was for the erection of 18 residential units with parking and open space. If you look at the plan in front of you, the open space area originally was at the top end of the site. We had a latter application in 2016, which was then to develop for 5 further units and the conversion of a communal building to a further residential unit, totaling 6 in total. There were a number of conditions attached to the 2016 application, A number of those conditions weren't discharged whilst they were building on site. So effectively this application has come in to retain the development as built, really mop up all of the outstanding planning conditions, submit all of the details. So the scheme in front of you, other than some slight revisions in relation to some of the parking layout and some of the works next to the tennis club, the application before you is pretty much the same as was approved by the 2015 and 2016 consents. So your officers are happy with the submission of the details by condition, and it's a matter of really of clearing up the outstanding matters at the site. So the recommendation is made to approve. It's subject though to the applicant entering into a unilateral undertaking to bind all of those the original planning obligations of the 2015 and 2016, so that they are enforceable against this current application. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you. I'm not going to object to this, but I'm just clarifying. Is this what the development's now being marketed as Arbor Vale, with a little shop in the centre of Dinas Powys? Is this the one that we're referring to here?
I'm afraid I don't know the name.
It is, yes.
It is, okay, fine.
It's just that I want to make a point for the record, which is that I was a member of the Healthy Living Social Care Committee at the time that Brynaithin was closed down and demolished, etc., etc. And part of the discussion around that time was really for an older people's village, or it was something that was to be beneficial for the community. And I just feel a little bit let down that this is what we've ended up with, because when I walk past estate agents in Dinas Powys with very high costs on something that was Vale of Glamorgan land and was a residential care home for people, then I just feel a little bit disappointed that this is really the way that the site has ended up in terms of what was the original aim of the council when it was decided to be surplus to requirements and demolished a few years ago. That's not an objection to what's in front of us, because that's what's in front of us, but I'm a little bit disappointed by what we've ended up with compared to what I hoped would be a better scheme.
Thank you. Councillor King.
Thanks, Chair. I just wonder if I can just have a bit of clarification. In my ward, there's the sheltered housing complex of Redlands House, Redlands Avenue, and it was originally designated the outer lying properties would be for over 50s or something or other. That over time has changed, and it does sometimes cause difficulties when there's younger people who want certain things and older people who don't. And I'm just wondering, how enforceable will these constraints be? Because I think, notwithstanding what my colleagues just said, if it's going to be over 55 and reading all the things about traffic and all the rest of it, it sort of works. If it, like Redlands, migrates and includes younger people, it won't.
Stephen?
You're quite right. As the background on page 206, the background states, it was originally set out with the original application that the age limit, which is over 55, that was actually controlled by the lease. That was the reason why the council retained ownership of the site, and that's why there's not a planning condition. So the control is via a lease, and if the council are aware of any breach, so it is secure. It's secure by lease, and it'd be a breach of the lease agreement.
Thank you. With that in mind. Move officer recommendations, Councillor Bird. Seconder for that, Councillor Penrose this time. All those in favour of officer recommendations? That's unanimous, thank you. Moving on to planning application 2017/01229/FUL, Church Cottage, Aberthin Lane, Aberthin. Who's speaking on this? Vicky.
Thank you, Chair. Members may recall it wasn't that long ago this application was before us, first time round, sorry, not this application, but a development for 2 houses on this site. It wasn't that long ago. This is now a resubmission of that application, but dealing with some relatively minor changes to the design of the two dwellings. Plot 1 is largely the same as what was previously approved. There are some alterations and changes to the dwelling known as Plot 2, the addition of a ground floor canopy to the north, south and west elevations, additional windows in the front elevation to serve the lower ground floor, the addition of a pitched roof above the garage, alterations to the rear roof slope with removal of gables from the consented scheme, and the provision of a hipped roof and a dormer. And the elevation plans are clearly shown in the application report and on the screen as well this evening. The only other change is in respect of the affordable housing contribution. With this application, the applicant has actually put forward a viability case to demonstrate that the costs of the proposed scheme don't facilitate the payment of an affordable housing contribution. So it had previously secured an affordable housing contribution and agreed subject to a 106. This now is for an open consent without that section 106 requirement. For those of you that are alert, you'll notice that we're not suggesting a clawback provision or a time-limited consent on this one. And it's a case that we're going to have to look at these as and when, fact and degree, and having regard to each application. This site is a particularly constrained site. It's a really steep site. They've got massive costs in terms of excavating the land to be able to build these two houses. And those costs are extremely unlikely to change at any point in the short or medium term. And therefore, the sort of fear that we might have on another site that the developer can quickly profit in a few years if he just puts a fork in the ground and then moves away. We don't have those concerns with this site because those costs are extremely likely to be there forever, if you like. So the viability issue is not likely to change, and therefore it wouldn't be reasonable for us to restrict the development any more than the normal. So the officer's recommendation, given the changes to the dwellings themselves are relatively minor, we don't have concerns with those in terms of their visual impact. It is for approval of the development.
Councillor Parker.
Yeah, I am concerned in this one on the fact that a new application means that the affordable housing contribution previously agreed, and I won't say it influenced the decision, but undoubtedly it was part of the original consent, has now meant that £57,000 towards a new affordable house has probably been lost. I understand clearly how these things are assessed, but I actually wonder whether or not we actually assess them in very fine detail, or maybe we should have a stronger control on them. So maybe just a small comment on that.
Vicky?
Thank you, Chair. I can assure you that we absolutely scrutinise the viability information that comes through on those. We do look through these things with a fine-tooth comb, as you'd expect. And, I am satisfied that the case here is justified for not asking for it. Whether or not the developer had any other incentive first time round in paying that contribution, not asking the question, not demonstrating the case, don't think it would really be appropriate to comment. The development is not unacceptable because it doesn't pay the affordable housing contribution by virtue of the case now being proven.
Can I just ask, in terms of the policy we discussed earlier, would this fall under self-build in the context of what we're talking about?
It may well do. Because they've demonstrated a viability case, it's irrelevant because we're not suggesting that a legal agreement is attached. But my understanding is that the applicant wants to build and live in one of the properties, and given that there is an existing house on the site already, we're only talking about a net gain of one house anyway here. If that net gain of one house was a house that was a self-build unit, they could have otherwise gone through the self-build exemption when that's in place. So.
Councillor Johnson.
So I don't know if Victoria has to answer this question or should answer this question, but I mean, is this the house that's referred to in the earlier report as being the one that's submitted a new application? And yes. Okay.
With that in mind, does anyone else have a comment? Councillor Johnson.
Sorry, but I mean, I mean, you've explained the specific circumstances surrounding this property. But I mean, are you able to assure us that we are not likely to be setting a precedent as a result of this that will result in the other properties that have already signed up then also withdrawing and thereby negating the process? And or, following on from Councillor Gray's question, have they been in any case referred to the self-build policy in any case?
There's absolutely nothing stopping any applicant putting in a planning application when there's a material change in planning circumstances, whether that's because they've realised that their site is unviable and therefore they'd like to put that argument forward, like in this case, or because there's been a change in planning policy which allows a self-build exemption. If any of those ones listed that have already been secured, if they are self-builders and they become aware of the change in policy that's been agreed this evening and at Cabinet, then clearly they may well put planning applications in to benefit from that self-build exemption.
With that in mind,